In a world where healing hands and redemptive hearts intertwine, let me tell you a compelling story that transcends medicine and delves into the depths of human connection and second chances. Enjoy the story. Dr. John Baker, a renowned surgeon in his late 30s, had it all: a successful career, a luxurious apartment in the heart of the city, and a wardrobe of custom-tailored suits. He was the envy of his colleagues and the toast of the town. But beneath the veneer of success, John was haunted by his past. As he stepped out of his apartment building one crisp morning, John couldn't help but reflect on his failed marriage to Jessica, a wealthy socialite who had grown tired of waiting for him to come home from long shifts at the hospital. They had met during their college years, drawn together by their shared ambition and drive. Jessica was studying art history, her eyes set on curating at a prestigious museum, while John was singularly focused on becoming a top surgeon. Their courtship was a whirlwind of fancy dinners, art gallery openings, and weekend getaways to Jessica's family's vacation homes. John was swept up in the glamour of it all, and before he knew it, they were married in a lavish ceremony that graced the pages of the city's most prominent society magazines. But as the years wore on, the cracks in their relationship began to show. John's dedication to his work meant late nights and missed dinners, birthdays, and anniversaries. Jessica, who had given up her own career aspirations to be the perfect surgeon's wife, grew restless and resentful. She began to spend more time with her society friends, attending charity galas and fashion shows without John by her side. Rumors began to swirl about her close friendship with a certain wealthy philanthropist, and though John tried to ignore the gossip, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing his wife. The final straw came when John missed their 5th wedding anniversary dinner because of an emergency surgery. Jessica had planned an elaborate surprise party, and when John finally arrived home, exhausted and apologetic, he found her sitting alone in their darkened dining room, surrounded by melted candles and untouched champagne. "I can't do this anymore, John," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, but I love myself too. And I can't keep waiting for a husband who will never put me first." The divorce was quick and relatively painless, thanks to their prenuptial agreement. Jessica got the house and a generous settlement, while John got to keep his medical practice and his pride. But though he threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, John couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something precious. Now, as he climbed into his modest but reliable foreign sedan, John tried to push thoughts of Jessica from his mind. He had a full day of surgeries ahead of him, and he needed to focus. But as he navigated the morning traffic, his mind kept drifting to happier times, to the early days of their marriage when everything had seemed so full of promise. Lost in thought, John barely noticed when a run-down vehicle cut him off at an intersection. He slammed on his brakes, narrowly avoiding a collision, and was about to lay on his horn when 4 burly men emerged from the car. They were a rough-looking bunch with scruffy beards, tattoos, and a menacing air about them. John recognized them immediately. Vince, Tony, Polly, and Frankie, a notorious gang of con artists known for staging accidents to extort money from unsuspecting drivers. Vince, the apparent leader, approached John's car, his face contorted in a mask of false outrage. "Hey, watch where you're going!" he shouted, slamming his hands on the hood of John's car. "You just hit my vehicle!" John, ever the calm professional, stepped out of his car, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe I hit your car," he said evenly. "Let's exchange insurance information and let the proper authorities handle this." But his words only seemed to anger the men further. They surrounded him, their fists clenched and their eyes glinting with malice. John felt a flicker of fear, but he stood his ground, determined not to show any weakness. "We don't need no insurance," Tony sneered, cracking his knuckles. "We got our own way of handling things." Before John could react, they were upon him, raining blows and grabbing at his pockets. He felt a sharp pain as Polly's fist connected with his jaw, and he tasted blood in his mouth. He tried to fight back, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. Within seconds, they had taken his cash, his watch, a gift from the mayor for his service to the city, and any other valuables they could find. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they were gone, speeding away in their battered car. John stood there for a moment, dazed and bleeding, trying to process what had just happened. He had never been mugged before, and the violence of it left him shaken. But he knew he couldn't let this incident derail his day. He had patience counting on him. With a deep breath, he climbed back into his car and continued on to the hospital. As he parked and made his way inside, he tried to push the mugging from his mind. He had to focus on the task at hand, an important surgery on an elderly man named Walter Smith. Walter had been admitted to the hospital the previous night, brought in by ambulance after collapsing at a bus stop. He had no identification, no insurance, and no family that the hospital could locate. He was alone and scared, and his condition was critical. But John had taken one look at Walter and seen a man in need. Despite hospital policy, he had vowed to operate on him pro bono. He knew it would mean long hours and extra paperwork, but he couldn't turn his back on a patient, no matter their circumstances. As he scrubbed in for the surgery, John felt a sense of calm wash over him. This was what he was meant to do, to heal, to help, to make a difference in people's lives. The mugging, his divorce, all his personal troubles seemed to fade away as he focused on the task at hand. The surgery was long and complex, but John was in his element. His hands moved with precision and skill, repairing damaged tissues and restoring blood flow. As he worked, he thought of Walter, of the fear and pain he must be feeling. He silently vowed to do everything in his power to give this man a second chance at life. Hours later, John stood by Walter's bedside in the recovery room. The old man was still groggy from the anesthesia, but he managed a weak smile when he saw John. "Thank you, doctor," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." John patted his hand gently. "You don't need to repay me, Walter. I'm just doing my job. Rest now and focus on getting better." Just then, the door to the recovery room opened and a well-dressed man in his 40s entered. He had a worried look on his face and he rushed to Walter's bedside. "Dad!" he exclaimed, taking Walter's hand. "I came as soon as I heard. Are you okay?" Walter smiled up at him. "I'm fine, Michael, thanks to this kind doctor here." Michael turned to John, his eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you so much, doctor. I don't know what we would have done without you." John shook his head modestly. "It's my pleasure, really. I'm just glad I could help." But as Michael stepped aside, John felt his blood run cold. Behind him, standing in the doorway, were Vince, Tony, Polly, and Frankie, the very same men who had mugged him just hours earlier. For a moment, John was too stunned to speak. What were they doing here? Had they followed him? Were they planning to finish what they started? But as he looked closer, he realized that something was different. They looked sheepish, almost ashamed, and they wouldn't meet his eyes. Michael, noticing John's discomfort, quickly introduced them. "These are my bodyguards," he explained. "I'm sorry, I should have mentioned earlier. I'm Michael Smith, Walter's son. I run a successful business, and these men provide security for me and my family." John nodded slowly, still trying to process this new information. "I see. Well, I'm glad Walter has such a supportive family." Michael smiled, but then his expression turned serious. "Doctor, I couldn't help but notice your injuries. What happened to you?" John hesitated, not wanting to cause any trouble. But then he saw the look on Vince's face, a mix of guilt and fear, and he knew he had to tell the truth. "I was mugged this morning," he said quietly. "On my way to work. 4 men in a rundown car. They took my watch, my cash, everything." Michael's eyes widened in shock. He turned to his bodyguards, his face a mask of anger. "Is this true?" he demanded. "Have you been running a side hustle, mugging innocent people?" The men shifted uncomfortably, their eyes downcast. Finally, Vince spoke up. "We're sorry, boss," he mumbled. "We didn't know he was a doctor. We thought he was just another rich guy, easy pickings." Michael shook his head in disgust. "I can't believe this. I trusted you, and you've been using your position to prey on others. This is unacceptable." He turned back to John, his expression contrite. "Dr. Baker, I am so sorry for what my men did to you. Please, let me make this right. I want to donate to the hospital, to cover my father's care and more, and I'll ensure that these men are properly punished for their actions." John was taken aback by the offer. He had never expected this outcome, but he couldn't deny the sincerity in Michael's voice. "That's very generous of you," he said. "The hospital could certainly use the support, and I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility for your men's actions." Michael nodded. "It's the least I can do. You saved my father's life, and I'm forever in your debt." Over the following weeks, an unlikely friendship blossomed between John and Michael. John became a regular guest at Walter's lavish home, sharing meals and stories with the family. He learned that Michael had built his business from the ground up, starting as a small-time importer and growing into a major player in the international trade scene. Despite his wealth and success, Michael remained grounded and humble. He treated his staff with respect and generosity, and he was always looking for ways to give back to the community. John couldn't help but admire him, and he found himself looking forward to their weekly dinners and weekend getaways. As for Vince, Tony, Polly, and Frankie, they took their punishment with surprising grace. Michael had given them a choice: face criminal charges or make amends in a meaningful way. They chose the latter and began volunteering at the hospital, donating blood and helping with maintenance tasks. John was skeptical at first, but as he watched the men interact with patients and staff, he began to see a change in them. They were more respectful, more empathetic, and seemed genuinely remorseful for their past actions. One evening, as John sat by Walter's bedside, the old man took his hand and smiled. "You know, doctor," he said, "when I came into your hospital, I had nothing. No ID, no insurance, no hope. But you saw past all that. You saw a human being in need, and you didn't hesitate to help." John felt a lump form in his throat. He had never really thought about it that way, but Walter was right. He had taken an oath to heal, to serve, and he had never once regretted it. "It's my job, Walter," he said softly. "But more than that, it's my calling. I became a doctor to make a difference, to ease suffering and give people a second chance at life. And every day, I am reminded of why I chose this path." Walter nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "You're a good man, John, and I'm so grateful to have met you. You didn't just heal my body, you healed my soul." As John drove home that night, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The mugging, his divorce, all his past troubles, seemed to fade away in the face of this newfound purpose. He had always known that medicine was his passion, but now he understood the true impact he could have on people's lives. He thought of Michael and his bodyguards, of how a single act of kindness had sparked a chain reaction of redemption and growth. He thought of Walter, of the countless patients he had treated over the years, each one a reminder of the power of compassion and dedication. As he pulled into his driveway, John felt a renewed sense of determination. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew he would face them with the same unwavering commitment to his craft and his patients. He was a healer, a guardian, a beacon of hope in a world that often felt dark and uncertain. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was exactly where he was meant to be,